Security VIP is the official podcast of the security industry, from manufacturers to end users and everything in between. Security VIP is your home for nothing but the truth.
You think you know me?
On this day, I see clear. You're listening to the Security VIP Podcast, hosted by Taylor May, the official podcast of the security industry and home of nothing but the truth. Today on Security VIP, we feature the best in school safety and security. Representing Texas, Mike Matranga. Representing Colorado, Michael Newton. And representing Florida, Captain Rick Francis. Get ready for nothing but the truth.
Security VIP Nation, what is going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Security VIP Podcast, the official podcast of the security industry and your home for nothing but the truth. As always, I'm your host, Taylor May. And on today's episode, we are bringing the fire. We are bringing the heat. That's right. For today's episode, we're featuring three familiar faces from the K-12 vertical who are national leaders for school safety and security. Representing Colorado, we have Mr. Michael Newton. Representing Florida, we have Captain Rick Francis. And representing the great state of Texas, we have the one and only Mr. Mike Matranga. Gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast today. How are we doing today?
Great. Thanks for having us, Taylor. I appreciate it.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you.
Doing great. Appreciate you having us on.
Of course. And Mike Newton told me not to say anything about all three of these guys having no hair, but I always like to make this joke. It's something about let me just set the tone for this episode, man. The reason why I have all three of these guys, they've been on my podcast before one-on-one, but the reason I've had them on my podcast is because they are national leaders in K-12 and school safety and school security. And it just for whatever reason, all of them have no hair. I don't know if that's like a coincidence or that's just like the trend. But if you guys want to be successful, that's one of the traits you're going to have, I guess. But guys, let's get right into it. I'm not going to go about your background. For my followers and listeners, if you want to hear about every single one's background, you guys can watch the episode with all three of these guys. But let's get right to the point, guys. I took a poll a couple weeks ago about what verticals are most reactive. It was a tie between retail and education. Retail came in first, education came in second, but they were pretty much neck and neck. And I want to talk about everything going on in K-12 right now. A couple weeks ago, we saw the Oxford shooting. Before then, we had students protesting across the nation, not feeling safe in class. You guys, all three, representing your respective states, have got recognition for what you've done for not only your school districts, but all around the community, society, and making sure kids, students, and parents feel safe attending the district. You guys are now different roles now. Mike Matranga is on the board of Texas City. Mike Newton, you actually went back to your hometown, leading school safety there. Captain Rick Francis, you did some phenomenal things for Seminole County Schools. Now you're doing some things with the Sheriff's Department and continue with that effort. But guys, what the fuck is going on in school safety and security right now across the nation? Why are kids protesting school safety? Who wants to take this first?
You asked the question, what's going on in school security? And
is education and security a joke right now, Mike? Because that's what people see is people think it's a joke when kids are protesting.
I think using the word joke is kind of a strong word, because to the people that are doing it, I think that they feel like they're doing a good job. And I've always said this, that it's a matter of who's doing it. And so, when you talk about security in general, you go into different verticals and they have professionals that have been in that industry, that are educated in that industry, trained in that industry. But for whatever reason, when we talk about K-12, universities, whatnot, there's just this overwhelming sense that, we can handle this as educators. And I think that the issue we're continuing to see, and after participating in legislation here in the state of Texas with Captain Francis in 2018 into 2019, we've consistently had the same message of, listen, we appreciate you as a teacher, as an educator. That's what you're supposed to do. We want you to teach. We want you to have a safe environment, but we want you to also let us handle the security. We understand that K-12 is unique. It's not like, going into any other field in conducting an advance or setting up certain protocols or mitigating factors. K-12 is unique. And I think that's kind of there's this push and pull between the security industry and the K-12 industry, the K-12 industry not necessarily releasing or relinquishing some of that power to security professionals because they know that it is such a different environment that they're not willing to let it go. And the security industry is seeing that, hey, you could be doing something better, more proactive rather than reactive. And so there's just been no authority that comes down and says, hey, kids, stop it. This is what we're going to do. And so, perfect example of that is, Captain Francis and I spoke before the Texas Senate in 2018 multiple times. And like I said, the same message has always been the same. You have to let security professionals handle these things. But through that testimony led to Senate Bill 11, which everyone thought was going to be a fantastic thing. But I can tell you, I'm now a school board member. I'm no longer the executive director of security for Texas City, and we've done, a ton of things in 3 years that most districts could never do. Not a lot has changed, even with Senate Bill 11 that is now mandated that schools perform certain tasks and stay on those tasks in order to be compliant. And I'll let you guys get and kind of piggyback on this, but here's one point in regards to Senate Bill 11. We always thought, okay, SB 11 is going to hold people accountable. All right. Well, in SB 11, schools now have to every 2 years conduct 2 or 3 years have to conduct a mandatory audit, right? Well, if you go back to some of my testimony, I opened one of my testimonies with the wolf is in the hen house, meaning that the students are in the ones that are committing the crimes. They're the ones that we need to be watching, and we have to be proactive in that measure. Well, nothing has changed with the new legislation because in those audits, the schools can conduct their own audits. So you tell me how effective that is. What school district, and I'm not questioning anybody's ethics and morals, but who's going to want to self-report that they have a problem? Because we have to look at this from that 30,000 square foot or 30,000 foot elevation looking down. Schools are not going to want to self-report because they are a brand. A brand is affected economically and monetarily. No parent is going to want to send their kid to a school that has a terrible safety rating. So therefore, what is going to be their motivation to actively and accurately report? And so if we want to get real serious about school security, we have to have an authority that is a third party, that is not a school board member or executive director of security or a SRO captain that's overseeing your audits. And like I said, no offense to them, I'm not calling them out and saying that they wouldn't report accurately. It just, for transparency purposes and liability purposes, you would think that there would be an authority that would oversee that. And we've got to get to that point where we start holding school districts accountable and legislatures accountable for making that mandatory, almost establishing an Office of Inspector General that oversees that. So that's my long-winded response. Gentlemen?
Just to piggyback on that, I completely agree. And most school districts we're seeing, it's a checkbox. They're trying to knock out these requirements and simply, hey, I check, I'm doing that. And there's not a single point of contact that's being held accountable for these standards, or they're just mitigating these standards. And school safety is a 24/7 job. Anyone in this call realizes that. And is something that we've seen it in Florida, where we had facility people that their job facilities, next thing you know, they're the school safety director. I mean, one of the smartest things we did is the superintendent literally handed the sheriff office the responsibility of school safety, quoting, "We're not experts in this. We want the experts to handle this responsibility," and gave us carte blanche authority to make changes and stuff like that. That's the way you get it done. And we have to hold these individuals accountable and set these minimum standards. I mean, there's no reason why every school in the United States doesn't have a minimum standard package for school safety, from, fencing, interior, exterior cameras, weapons detection, et cetera, and the state, local, federal, whatever funds it. And that's it. And then we work on the little things to make it work. And I've said it, many times over, that it's ironic. We talk about funding until that first drop of child blood hits our floors. And then there's anything that district or that school wants, they get. And that's where the problem is. It's simply, and the further and further we get away from these incidents, the less attention is given. And there's only a handful of people that are still beating the drum to get it right. And that's where I think we stand. The biggest challenge is it's just a checkbox for most people. There are some very serious people, but you can't have a facilities person handling school safety. You know, I've met some good people that come out of obviously law enforcement, emergency management, et cetera, that do a good job. But this job is very unique, and there's a lot of responsibility that comes with it.
Yeah, Mike.
And they both hit it. Yeah, no, they both hit it. And really, as Mike and Rick said, it comes down to accountability, holding people accountable for their actions. And I think it truly starts with square one, which, Captain Francis said, is hiring the right person, putting that safety and security director in that position and not allowing people who aren't familiar with that field make those critical decisions at the end of the day. As Mike said, we're responsible for the most, valuable people in the district out here and most vulnerable as far as our students go. And I think far too often, administrators, educators have too much say to the extent that they maintain that Mayberry mentality of it won't happen here. No, that would never happen in my school. And they kind of put that blockade and barrier between safety and security professionals that need to make those hard decisions. And I think a lot of it kind of boils down to putting convenience as a higher priority than security. Anytime you prioritize convenience over security, you open up a whole list of vulnerabilities to your students, your school, your staff, your personnel. And something that's kind of always blown me away, working with fire departments, law enforcement, is fire code. We have fire code for a reason. Students haven't perished or died in a school-related incident since 1958-ish. When are we going to have a set security guidelines and standard and code for K-12 industries? And when are we going to set the bare minimum standards, as Captain Francis said, that say every school must have X, Y, Z, exterior locked doors, classrooms that lock from the inside, IDS systems that detect held, propped, forced doors. And I think once we start to identify that, we can start to move forward, not only on a state level, but a national level. And really, like I said, it boils down, and schools need to have that external security and vulnerability risk assessment coming in from an outside perspective, laying fresh eyes, being able to pick your district apart. I know in Littleton, when I was there, we prioritized it on a 5-year rotating basis to have an external agency and entity come in and audit our schools, to provide that information to not only our community, our student staff, but our Board of Education, to prioritize our needs and what we need as a district.
A lot of good points there, guys. And Mike Matranga brought up the third-party audit. Obviously, he's in agreement of that. Michael Newton, it sounds like you're in agreement of third-party audit. Captain, you're in agreement of that as well. We're all shaking our head. Okay, yeah. So that's one of the things I would probably. Matranga, sorry, go aheing.
Yeah, one of the things. It's funny you talk about audits, because that was going to be my next thing. We talk about audits. Being a third party. Educators are supposed to have a higher level of education, right? They have a doctorate degree, master's degree, which would tell me that they're more intellectually inclined than most people to make better decisions. Well, that's not always the case. And I'm not knocking on, doctors or educators. I'm trying to be as nice as I can. But when I talk about audits, SB 11 was put in place so that we could have these independent audits, right? If I were a superintendent and if I were a person that was over school security, I would want a third party to come in so that I could decrease the liability on me, right? If I'm doing my own, what world or what vertical can you go into or market can you go into where you conduct your own evaluation and audit? It's like sitting down with an employee and saying, hey, fill out your audit or fill out your evaluation, rate yourself, and tell me how good of a job you did. Nobody does that. So why is this any different when we're talking about the safety and security of our staff, our students? And then people think about, they fail to think about our SROs or SLOs. We need to supply them with everything that they need to get home to their family safely. We're responsible for them as well. And so in reference to auditing, one of the things that I did here recently is, I started my own company, M6, and I thought, okay, well, state of Texas is going to have to require audits now, according to SB 11. So we put together all this marketing material. I've got former educators on my team. administrators so that, they can speak the language and talk the talk. They understand education and security. We pushed out marketing material to conduct audits in the state of Texas to over 150 school districts here along the Texas Gulf Coast. Do you know how many responses we got? Zero responses. And those people that we verbally talked to said, oh, we're just going to conduct our own audit. So tell me what has changed through SB 11 and through the legislation and through the testimony that Captain Francis and I conducted back in 2018 and 2019. And the answer is not a damn thing. Our kids are no safer today than they were 4 years ago when Santa Fe happened.
This is shocking, and we talk about this too all the time, guys. We talk about people staying in their lane, and this is an example right here. Is Mike Matranga, not to highlight Matranga more, but Mike Matranga. You and I talk about this all the damn time, dude. The reason for your success is you had a superintendent let you do your job effectively. Same thing with Michael Newton. Same thing with Captain Rick Francis. You guys had a leadership team and a superintendent that believed in your experience, your credentials, and your credibility to bring the right technology, procedures, plans, SOP plan, whatever in place. Since Mike Matranga went to the school board, since some changes have happened, our new superintendent came in at Texas City. Matranga, what happened to school security at Texas City? Talk about that real quick.
Man, you're trying to get me in trouble. I will just tell you, listen, the team that I left behind is pretty much disbanded. Guys got frustrated and left because, essentially our hands were tied. Some of the things that we put in place that people loved, that were extremely proactive, that were proven not only to serve our school community, but our community as a whole. One of those things was facial recognition. We were one of the first districts in the state of Texas, along with Santa Fe, to have AnyVision facial recognition. I can't tell you how effective that was. We had some students that were very dangerous. I mean, let's be honest. We have kids that are dangerous. We had some students that were very dangerous that were wanted for criminal charges. And I can tell you on more than one occasion, that software worked exactly the way that it was supposed to. We had built out our watch list based upon certain criteria. It did not take into consideration race, like a lot of the race baiters want to try to persuade you that it does. It simply worked off biometrics, which is a measurement of the face, almost like a fingerprint. It's yours. I can tell you one particular instance. We had a student that was extremely aggressive, had been known to carry weapons, who was wanted for a rape and also other felonies. That kid never made it into the school because the facial recognition camera on the exterior picked up that man, and identified him, sent the message to the individuals, and our SLOs met him at the front door and arrested him without incident. So why would we remove something like that? And so what I'm saying is, you asked what happened to Texas City. There's been some changes. Some of our mass notification systems that I had in place, they've changed to different platforms. And quite frankly, I mean, maybe they're better, maybe they're not. I don't know. But I can tell you that I don't personally feel that it is proactive as when I was there. One of the things that I always held in high regard was the ability to communicate right away. Something happens, you take that tactical pause, you assess the situation, you make a decision, you push out notifications to the parents, because that is what's going to make or break you. If you can control the message and control the parents from freaking out, by keeping them in communication, you're pretty much going to have control of that scene. And I don't think we do that effectively now, where I'm currently at as a board member at Texas City. So that's just my little tidbit of information.
That's all I was asking for, man. You just told me I don't feel like Texas City is as proactive as it once was, or what it was when I was there. That's all I needed to know. And that happened because of leadership. Because of leadership change.
When I first got there, the first thing that I did was hire 8 more deputies. The school board 2 years ago or 3 years ago voted to hire 8 more deputies. And then all of a sudden, we get new leadership, and all of a sudden we don't have the budget for that. We have to cut 5 deputies. So I don't even think that the public knows that we are less 5 deputies than we were last year. So why? One of the questions that I was asked when I first got, when new leadership came in, and no need to say who asked the question, but I was asked the question, why do we have AR-15s? Why do we own AR-15s? And my response was, because people who tend to walk into a school or shopping mall or a church and kill people usually do it with a high-powered rifle, a shotgun, or a combination of a high-powered rifle, shotgun, and a pistol. So our deputies, we are equally responsible for, outside of our staff and our students and our community, we need to supply them with the same tools to meet force with force. And so why someone would even ask that question is beyond me. It seems to me that it would be common sense. But there we go again with having educators make these decisions. And it's not a derogatory. I'm not trying to be, demeaning to them. It's just, let us do our job.
Captain, I know you wanted to say something about this too.
Well, I can echo what I've seen it, unfortunately in other districts as well. You lose the fish rots from the head first. And when upper management executives change and they don't have the same esprit de corps about school safety, or we get further and further from the last major incident in your state than that desire. But one thing that, obviously school safety has a lot on their umbrella, but one thing where I think the schools are missing the boat is school culture. I give you an example that I think is really relevant that I've used when I get in front of our principals every year is, we're responsible for the state college plus a few private schools. So I happen to be at a private school. So I will, obviously didn't know where it was a private school who get about 90% of their traffic is parents dropping them off. But what's different about this school is, when they drop them off, guess who's out there meeting those kids and making physical contact, talking to the parents, talking to the kid, how's your baseball game, whatever the case may be, doing fist bumps or high fives, was the principal, the SRD, and senior school administrators. So they set that culture that they're part of that school. Do you think that we have any problems at that school with, discipline issues or threats or anything in case? Because no, the answer is no, because they feel part of that school. It's part of their culture. It's embedded in them, and they obviously, handle. They understand that school safety is, we can put all the fences and all that stuff. But to Mike's point, the research has shown the problem's coming from within. So let's just make sure that we're setting that culture up where we can, obviously handle the people coming in, that the students, and make sure they feel part of the system. And lastly, I think, and I think everybody will agree, there's too much emphasis on active shooter. And I promise you, as the day is long, we're going to face more complex incidents that are far from a shooting incident, IEDs, drones, etc., where these incidents are getting a lot more challenging to us as responders and ultimately responsible for school safety. And that's where I think some people are missing the boat. I mean, I've seen legislation as late as today, and they keep on talking about active shooter. I'm like, listen, and that's great, but threats can come. We've seen threats come from vehicles, induced in crowds. We're going to see that stuff mirror in school settings, especially K-12.
Great point there that Captain just brought up. He talked about culture, and Michael Newton and I talked about that too a couple weeks ago, about the SRO having a very deep relationship with the student body. Kids are actually looking up to SROs, wanting to be a school resource officer or a cop. Mike Newton and I talked about that. Let's talk about that further, because Captain Rick Francis brings up a good point too. Active shooter technology and active shooter problem is obviously a hot buzzword. I wouldn't say that's the biggest threat around K-12. I think it's one of the biggest threats around K-12, but I think we talk about mental health too as another threat in K-12 right now, because like everyone I think agrees on this call, it comes from within. The problem is always comes from within. So Michael Newton, you and I talked a little bit about this a couple weeks ago. Your thoughts on the biggest threat to K-12? Is it mental health? Is it active shooter? Is it IED? All of the above? Talk about that further.
No, great point. And really, I do think it boils down to mental health. And I think, the last 2 years or so have exacerbated the impact it has on the youth, nationwide. Here in Colorado, as I mentioned before, we have Safe to Tell, which is state mandated anonymous reporting line. And we had a 45 to 50% reduction in tips during the peak of COVID, the entire year of 2020. But the one thing that did not go down was mental health. And it's people still reporting mental health concerns and constraints. And I think, you know, it really does come down to prevention and intervention. It doesn't matter what security system you have in place. It doesn't matter what bells and whistles you have, but that all becomes reactive to an extent once an incident happens. So what preventative layers do you have in place through multidisciplinary team threat assessment processes? And that doesn't just mean your educators and counselors. That means looping in your SROs. It's far too often I see schools conducting threat assessments on students without involving that school resource officer. And it comes with all the bureaucracies, the tapes, the lines, FERPA this, FERPA that. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter when it comes to health and safety. However, we can safeguard students in that school and place another member on that team to conduct that threat assessment on them, identify pre-tech indicators, behaviors, concerning behaviors. You know, what's the plausibility, specificity of the threat that they made? But more importantly, when you document that, who is it shared with and what are the follow-up measures? What safety plans do you have in place to prevent or redirect those behaviors? And how are you getting them the help that they need? Far too many schools and districts in this nation sign it, do the threat assessment, and they leave it at that. You need the follow-up action and plan after that to provide the support measures and mechanisms that students need.
Captain, your thoughts on this? I saw you come off mute.
Right on point. Mike's right on point. You know, getting back to that minimum standard at every single school in the U.S., a highly trained SRO or SRD or whatever equivalent, you know, however they call it, and a mental health if you could do that on every single campus, we would be out of business, honestly. If we had a minimum standard package of, you know, the hard stuff, the fencing, all that other stuff, and then we couple that with a highly trained SRD, SRO, and a mental health expert on the campus, our job, we'd be out of work because that would eliminate a vast majority of what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I want to touch on that real quick. Also, you know, I think the combination of what both of these gentlemen talked about, you know, Captain Francis talked about culture, Mike talked about mental health. And, you know, I think I've said multiple times on the record that, you know, at Texas City ISD, we had a $6.5 million budget because of the bond. And so, you know, when that's publicly advertised, you know, frankly, a lot of people come out of the woodworks because they see that publicly advertised budget is $6.5 million. And they're honestly, you know, they're not really concerned about the safety and welfare of the students and staff. They're worried about putting money in their pockets. And so that would be one of the things that I talk to, you know, professionals about is be careful of the things that people promise you, because you've seen technology after technology, people coming in with all the latest and the greatest. And quite frankly, none of that shit is really important unless you have a culture and a mental health solution. And I've said that multiple times, that if I personally could have spent the money the way that I wanted, not how the bond was written, because people need to understand that I had to spend it per the bond and per what the citizens wanted, I personally would have invested at least half of that into mental health resources and behavioral resources for these students. One of the things that we've seen is an uptick, even as I was leaving the district and becoming a school board member, is a great number of increased discipline, assaultive behavior, emotional outbursts. I truly felt like COVID, and I said it during COVID, that I felt like COVID was going to be a problem for when kids were able to return back to school, because they've been without that structure that a school provides. Listen, schools are amazing, right? We have great staff. We have great aides and administrators. Those are sometimes all of the adult attention that kids get, right? And so we went that long period of time with kids not having that and without that structure, and it's caused problems. You know, we talk about mental health. One of the things that I want to dig a little bit deeper on is, I'm not sure about you guys in Colorado and Florida, but in Texas, and at least at Texas City ISD, some of the things that I've seen is a growing concern, and I mentioned it to our legislature. I had talked, you know, before the Senate, even after Captain Rick Francis was there, and I said that I felt like one of the growing threats to our community and to our schools was the high rate in which we are diagnosing and putting kids into special education programs. You know, but of course we had some political people on that panel that felt like I was being, derogatory, speaking derogatory to children that had special needs. And that was not what I was saying at all. That's the way that this person internalized it because he didn't believe with my political belief. But what I'm telling you is schools are diagnosing or testing in students at a higher rate of special education in 504 than ever before. When I got to Texas City ISD in 2018, how I was, made or informed that we had a problem was I saw some kids that were just completely out of line. I mean, true danger, not only to themselves, but to others. And I kept asking, why can't we do something with this kid? Not punitively, like, why don't we have resources that can help this kid? And because of the federal government coming in and establishing these new discipline guidelines for these children, there's not a lot that schools can do. And people want to talk about why are we seeing a high rate of teacher burnout and teachers quitting the profession? It's because they have students in their class that are truly dangerous, emotionally disturbed. And I'm not picking on these kids. I'm just telling you, I'm concerned for the staff. I'm concerned for that student. I'm concerned for the atmosphere and the culture of the environment of the school, right? So, when I was at Texas City in 2008, I think we had a little less than 900 kids that were in that classification. Now we're double that. We have 7,200 kids here. We're at 20% special ed in 504. Those are kids that, a lot of them cannot be disciplined the way that a student that's not in those classifications could be, disciplined. And so you tell me you got a kid who smacks the hell out of somebody in the face, and then they, 5 days later, they do a review of their file and of their behavior. And then they say, oh, it's a manifestation of their behavior. Sorry, we can't discipline them. We put them right back in the same class with the same student that they smacked the hell out of. And tell me that that's not a problem? It's absolutely a problem. How do we fix that? Because the politician that got mad at me because I brought this to his attention, he thought that I was making fun of kids that fall into those categories. That's not what I was saying at all. What I was saying is we cannot classify students with a behavioral disability the same as an intellectual disability. And they can't have the same protections. Because what we're doing is we're putting dangerous kids right back into the classroom with kids that want to learn. And you tell me, how is that fair to my kid or somebody else's kid that's there, that's learning, that's sitting in their class, sitting in their desk, and they're getting abused physically, verbally, they're tearing up classrooms, they're destroying property, and we've just got to take it? Come on, man. No, something's got to change. I'm really passionate about that. And I'm upset because the students who are intellectually disabled that those protections were there for initially, their intentions were good, they're now having to share these resources. And that's not okay. That is not okay. So, yeah, we have a major problem with that. Major.
This is why I have you guys on this, because I hope this gets a lot of traction. I hope people listen to what you guys are saying. I'm taking a lot of good notes here too. Obviously, we talked about the third-party audit. We talked about investing in foundation. The two foundation is culture and mental health. We talked about those two things. I think those things need to be invested in first. And we talk about proactive technologies around that. We talk about legislation and Matranga, you talk about kind of like, perception is almost reality, but sometimes people don't want to believe reality. We talk about politics getting in the way of that. And we talk about turnover in school systems. We talk about not just security being an issue, but we talk about teachers not wanting to teach anymore because of certain political beliefs have affected their ability to do their job. And that's an issue, right? And we talk about people staying in the lane. So there's so much change to happen, not just from a security perspective, but from a whole holistic lens about how kids go to school nowadays. Because to Mike's credit, the kids that are there to learn and get something and better their day have all these external hurdles that they have to go through now, being a young kid. And that's an issue. That's definitely
I've got something to throw in there real quick. I got a question for the other two gentlemen. I really feel like, one of the things that I want to touch on today, if you can't tell, I'm really kind of fired up about this because we're still having this conversation for almost 4 years after we testified, Captain, and why are we still having this conversation? It makes no sense. So, people always talk about what can we do better? How can we fix it? How can we hold people accountable? I can tell you, we're never going to be able to hold people accountable because of sovereign immunity. Schools have sovereign immunity. So what motivates a person to do what's right or a system to do what's right when there's really no true consequence? When schools know that they're not going to be truly monetarily or even in some instances criminally held liable for failing to act, just like Oxford. Student knew he was going to do it. Parents knew he was going to do it. School knew that he had the threat the night before. They brought him in. They spoke to him. And the next day, and they released him back to campus. And he did it.
Yep.
That to me is the definition of negligence.
Yeah,
but what's going to happen? I don't know. I will tell you, I am very happy with the response from the DA out there, the prosecutor in Michigan, and the governor for saying that not only are we going to hold the kid accountable, we're going to hold the parents accountable, which they're now in custody.
Yep.
And we're going to hold the school district accountable, and we're going to have a third party come in. That, I tell you, if anybody wants to see how it should be done, according to my belief, right now they are leading the charge on getting this done right. So let's talk about sovereign immunity here and why it needs to go away for school.
Taylor, it's interesting because, and I'm sure the other gentleman will say the same thing. Their legislators are tired of talking about school safety. I've been told from House, Senate, both sides, doesn't matter where they fall, left, right, leaning, they are tired of talking about school safety. And that's even pre-COVID, post-COVID, they're tired of talking about it. And it's going to take some grand jury indictments and some things like that to get these school districts excited about getting it right and not just checking a box and just say, hey, yeah, we're compliant here, but they're not taking those extra steps. And rest assured, there'll be that school district will be writing some big checks.
You bring up a very valid point. And even after, the Arapahoe High School shooting here in Colorado in 2013, state passed limited waiver of liability as far as sovereign immunity goes for schools who didn't really act in a reasonable way for foreseeable threat or active violence at schools. But fast forward several years later, and you still see the same incident occurring in other states. I do agree that it's going to come down and boil down to grand jury indictment or the federal government getting involved and basically imposing that on states and school districts nationwide. Schools need to start acting. If you have a foreseeable threat or active violence, you need to take the necessary steps and actions to safeguard your students and staff members. And if you don't, there are going to be repercussions. It's sad to say that this just keeps happening time and time again.
Yeah, one of the things we talk about sovereign immunity, we talk about accountability. I always refer to this one incident that really, it kind of was the changing point, and it was about halfway through my tenure at Texas City ISD. We had a student that threatened to stab a teacher, and it wasn't at the same time that this happened. We were writing a $2.2 million grant for mental health resources, right? We didn't end up getting it because I guess they figured we had too much money, but I thought it was pretty well written. It was 86 pages. But we had a student that threatened to stab a teacher, and he's in custody. Nobody ever should be putting a kid in custody. We should get to the problem before it comes to them being put in handcuffs. And so I get over there and I'm talking to this kid. I walk in and I can tell immediately that he's super aggravated, right? And so I walk in with our lieutenant. And he immediately tells our lieutenant, hey, pull out your gun, shoot me in the head. Just go ahead and end it. And I was like, whoa, calm down, like pump the brakes. Let's talk about this, buddy. No problem, right? Hey, everybody's good. We're going to solve this. We're going to get you squared away. No, I want to die, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, all right, start rolling mental health. So we start getting mental health deputies out there because now I want him to go to a 72-hour hold so he can be evaluated. And so through this process, couple things happen. I have my assistant start pulling up his disciplinary record, and then his dad's there. And dad comes in, and instead of like being a father, he starts, berating the kid. And we're like, oh, hold on. you got to go, you got to step outside. So step outside, and the dad tells me it's your effing responsibility to make sure that my son, is not an asshole. And I'm like, whoa, no, that is your responsibility as a father. It's our responsibility to educate him. So that tells me one thing: he's not getting what he needs at home, which is why he's probably in the situation that he's in. And so once we pull all of his data, and I'm going through his data, and he's got 25 disciplinary incidents over the last year. 11 of them are assaultive behavior, where he actually assaulted people, stabbed people with pencils. Guess what the school labeled it as in the system? Code of conduct violation. No, that is a stabbing. That is an assault. So when I follow up with the questions of why did we not identify that and classify that as an assault? Well, we get dinged by the state if we have too many assaults.
Reputation. Yep.
Right. So, I'm going through this, and I've got 11 incidents of assaultive behavior, telling the assistant principal that he or she was going to kill him. Okay. Stabbing people with pencils, slapping another kid. Not one criminal charge is filed, and not one of them, except I want to say 1 or 2 that were labeled as assaultive behavior. The other 9 or 10 were labeled as code of conduct violations. So what I'm telling you is if we can't depend on education to classify those behaviors in their internal system correctly, how can we depend on them or trust them to conduct their own internal audits regarding your child, my child's safety? So what's going to motivate them? Lawsuits are going to motivate them, and criminal charges are going to motivate them. Sovereign immunity is what's protecting them right now. And in some cases, if you can prove absolute negligence, schools can be held liable, but almost never does that happen. And so I'm not saying, hey, go out and be a litigious person and start suing school districts. That's not what I'm saying at all. So please, everybody listening, don't get it twisted. What I'm saying is there's got to be accountability, and it's got to start with that. So, it's a shame. This happens in every district, in every city, in every state, and this has got to stop. We've got to get national legislation, and I think that the 4 of us right here can get it done.
This is good, and I think that's why we see the protests happen. A couple weeks ago, it happened in Milwaukee. Then it went to Springfield. Captain Mike Newton, thoughts on kids protesting school safety and security. Should the people in the positions of power running those school districts, the director of security or the chief of police or whoever, should those people be fired, for one? And let's talk about Oxford. That shooting that happened, should the people in charge, should those people be let go? If we talk about accountability, what are your recommendations there?
I don't want to knee-jerk react because I haven't seen the after-action reports, but all indications there, just like we had here in Parkland, there were so many signs that were missed that it's unexcusable based on what I've seen so far. But I would like to see, how this thing materializes from Mike Newton's discussion earlier about threat assessment. I mean, that sounds like that individual should not be allowed back on campus. And I'm not a fan of kicking the can down the road, because you might have just poked the bear, and now at least when they're on campus, you have some control, but not to do back checks or whatever the case may be before that individual came on your grounds is beyond me. And then for the parents and the faculties to, at least on the surface, know about the potential for threats. I mean, we look at, for example, the way legislation is written in Florida, if a kid says makes a threat, we're going to investigate it like it's the real deal. Now, an elementary kid without the intent and ability to carry it out, that's, we're going to do our due diligence, but, certainly that individual is not going to face anything. And like to Mike's point earlier, I don't care if any of our SODs, SRO make a single arrest on campus. That's not what we're there for. We're there to make it safe. Does it mean sometimes removing an individual? Sure, certainly. But, if you have a bona fide threat and the individual has the ability and intent to carry it out, there's a clue. They shouldn't be on your campus, and you should be giving, and we call it wraparound service, law enforcement, mental health, everybody, family members, whatever case may be, school administration should have their arms wrapped around this incident, including law enforcement, and resolved or netted out or mitigated. I don't remember what district it was, but I was talking to an individual at a conference one time that could not resolve a potential threat, an individual. So the local law enforcement, police department had 24/7 surveillance on them until they could get it resolved. And it took some time to get some protection orders and all that stuff in place and to get them institutionalized. But they're doing 24/7 surveillance on the individual until this all came through together. I'm not saying that we're going to do that on every kid or that every kid deserves that, but certainly the clues were there based on what I've read so far that this kid should not have been given that opportunity to carry it out.
They brought up valid points, Captain. I just want to hit on two different things. One, you brought up a valid point with the bag drags and the follow-up actions from that threat assessment process. It goes back to formally documenting all that stuff on a safety plan and saving that safety plan for record purposes and sharing it and disseminating it with people who need to know. What teachers does the student have? Who do they have engagements with and encounter on a day-to-day basis? But throughout that process, do they have morning check-ins when they get to the school? Are you bag dragging them right there, checking their backpack, making sure nothing's on them? Do they have escorts to and from class? What does that process look like? But Taylor, you brought up a valid point of students kind of walking out. I think for far too long, it was hard for us to sell the why to students as to why we do what we do in school safety and security. And I think this is a reflection point for Board of Education members, superintendents, school staff members, parents, community members, to realize that students know what they want, they understand what they need, and that's a safe and secure learning environment. Studies show students who feel safe and secure are better learners. They score higher on tests, and it's up to us to provide that culture and climate for them. I think part of that process is to include your students in your emergency response or emergency planning and preparedness stages. In my old district, we had a safe school design team, which is kind of an emergency management committee. And a key component of that was including students in that. They know what the problems are. They know what needs to be fixed. And if you're able to sell it to them, they're going to sell it to their counterparts and their fellow students faster than you or any other staff member will in that entire building. It just comes back to involving them in that process. All hazards, including all stakeholders, in that collaboration effort.
100%. That's a really good point that Michael Newton brought up. Student body involvement, man. The quickest way to make change happen is let the students do the work for you, man. I love that, dude. That's easy. Okay, we're getting short on time here. I want to finish with a couple more questions. Let's end on some positive notes. You guys brought a lot of good recommendations here too, but I want to talk about last two questions here. Obviously, you guys have got national recognition because of what you guys have done for your school districts in your respective states, but the process to get there had to be challenging. It had to involve a lot of different approvals, a lot of different protocols, a lot of products and technologies. What do you feel like is one solution or one technology or one improvement or one process that has made your life 10 times easier that you have implemented inside that school district to do your job more effectively? Name at least one solution that has done that for you guys. And I want to start with Captain Francis first.
You're pinning me down to one.
I know all the vendors that reach out to you guys, blow your emails up and cell phones. So two things. One, directly reporting to the superintendent in my role was the best thing that ever. When we structured this, I was given carte blanche. I said, well, in order for this to work, I need to move my office over to the executive suite, and I need to report directly to the superintendent. And secondly, having a soft panic button with multimedia operability to connect all the dots. So in the case of emergency, we had, blanket notifications and getting the right resources on target. Love it. Michael Newton, what's yours, bro?
Man, it's hard to narrow it down to one. I'm telling you, there's so many that come to mind. For me, I'll just kind of leave it as an umbrella for districts who didn't or may not have kind of invested in a video surveillance system that had all the bells and whistles, all the analytics, all the capabilities of some of the manufacturers nowadays. Venture down the path of SaaS or software as a solution. It's cost efficient, and at the end of the day, you're going to get a better bang for your buck, and it unlocks potentials such as facial recognition, weapons detection, crowd detection, loitering detection, you name it. It's endless as to what it can provide for you. And for many districts who have fiscal and financial constraints, this is a very cost-effective and efficient way to reach the end goal and still provide that prevention stage to where you can detect something before it may ever occur.
Sass, that is definitely the future of the industry. Matranga, what's yours, man?
Yeah, like these guys, it's really pretty much impossible to say that there's one thing that was the most effective, because I felt like, a lot of the things that we did were effective. So I'm going to give you two, really. Like Captain Francis says, is culture, right? You have to have a welcoming culture. And, I'll be the first one to tell you, when I first got there, I didn't have a lot of time on my hands. We were 10 miles away from Santa Fe. We had people breathing down our necks to spend this money the way that they wanted us to spend it. Had I had some time, I would have done things completely different. But I will say that I don't regret investing our money into people, into our SROs. The ability to have an SRO on a campus that can establish a relationship with maybe that student that no other teacher can, or even their parents can, to, give that fist bump that is having a bad day. They take them aside, they talk to them, they can talk them off the ledge, whether they're wanting to hurt themselves or someone else. That physical presence on campus of knowing that, we've got someone here who has our best interest, that's going to defend us with their life, possibly. I think that that's key. And so, hiring those 8 individuals initially as my first step, and the things that we did, that is something that I think you just can't replace. We have some states throughout the nation that are wanting to disband SROs and remove them from campuses, which I think is just a completely ridiculous idea. And I think that those people will quickly realize the effectiveness of those officers on those campuses. So that's really the first thing. The second thing is we had a gold mine, and I almost got rid of it. It's the least expensive thing that I ever bought, and it was P3 Campus. And it was an anonymous reporting application. The problem is before I got there, the way that it was configured, we had 2 people in the entire district that received the notification. One was one SRO and one assistant superintendent. And God, they're great people, don't get me wrong. But the way that I designed it is I took the interdisciplinary approach to threat assessment, and we siloed out that system where every campus had their own P3 campus reporting. We put on that system the interdisciplinary threat assessment team, the campus administration, every SRO, the superintendent's cabinet, and the superintendent, so that when a tip came through, there was no chance for anybody to say, well, we weren't aware, right? So it was holding people accountable that way in a means of communication. So P3 Campus was like $3,000 a year. It was well worth its weight in gold.
It's too much money, Mike. Too much money for these schools, man.
Oh man, dude, listen, if you don't have anything, you got to have that. You got to have good quality and qualified SROs that have the right personality. You can't have some hard hitter deputy or officer that's just going to be there to jam kids up. Like Captain said earlier, and I said earlier, I gauge our success based upon whether we have to put a kid in handcuffs or not. My goal every year, and contrary to what some believe, my goal every year was to have 0 arrests, 0. And that's really what we wanted. But, it just doesn't work out that way.
Taylor, I just got to foot stomp one thing real quick. And that's what Mike said about districts trying to get rid of the SRO program. It's important for any district out there that's kind of mulling that thought over, that SROs aren't just a law enforcement officer. They're an integral part of your school staff, community, culture, climate. And for a lot of these students, that's the only positive interaction, or the first positive interaction they may ever have with a law enforcement officer. And for any school officials, board of education members, anybody out there kind of thinking about that process, removing them, repealing it, ask yourself, if an incident happens and that response time is 3 to 5 minutes, and it could have been over in 30 seconds, can you stand on a national platform and justify why you did what you did? Because I sure as hell can't myself. So that's something that I hope to our district never have to worry about that, but just think that over.
It's just sad that we would have to even talk about removing SROs, dude. It's just like a joke nowadays. Like, you're really gonna remove someone that's armed and there to protect the lives and community. It's just sad. Okay, so guys, I mean, shit, dude. Where do we go from here? Are we going to Congress? Are we gonna go write some legislation together? I mean, what's the next step, guys? Final question. Who wants to take it?
I'll take the first one, and then I'll shut up. I'll tell you this, and this is not really a question. It's more of a challenge. And, I hope that this podcast is really pushed out nationally. My challenge would be to educators to let us do our jobs. That's my first challenge. We don't intend any harm. We're not threatening in any way. We're willing to work with you. That's my first challenge. My second challenge would really be to our national legislators. If you want to move mountains, if you want to do something that is going to leave your legacy as a legislator, let the three of us, the four of us, and some of our friends, let us come sit down with you. Let us talk about what we envision as security professionals that is going to absolutely change the course of school security in the United States and hopefully globally, because I truly believe that the men in this group right here have the ability to do that if we are allowed the platform. So that's my challenge to our legislators, is give us that platform, carve out that time, let us come speak to you, and let's put aside political differences, let's put aside personal differences or philosophies, and just let us be heard and make some change. Let that be your legacy. Saving the lives of staffs and students throughout the United States should be everyone's priority.
Captain, your thoughts?
We're responsible for the most vulnerable. It's just simple as that. Give us the tools to get the job done and get out of the way. We've mentioned this before. There's no child should ever be hurt on a campus that we could have prevented. And there's so many different individuals involved with this trying to do the job. Let's stop trying to put a Band-Aid on a shotgun wound, and let's just simply resolve the problem. Not just put a little Band-Aid here, Band-Aid there, and move on, because we got to get down to the basics and just simply resolve it and then move forward. By several different things we mentioned during this podcast is a great start. And I simply believe that put everything aside, get the job done, and quit talking about it over and over again until we get nothing done.
Bring us home, Mike Newton.
Man, I'm just going to keep beating this drum over here. For any district out there, if you do not have a safety or security director, invest in it. It is worth the investment and peace of mind to let them remove and relieve you of that safety burden. Allow them to bear that burden, allow them to make the decisions that are difficult. And as both, the captain and Mike said, stay out of their way and let them make the decisions that are best for the students. You hired them for a reason. You employed them for a reason. More importantly, don't act or make decisions in a vacuum or a silo. This is a team and collaborative effort. All decisions that we make here at my district now and my old district involved our sheriff's department, PD, fire department, school personnel, students. We even brought parents in. Never act in a vacuum or silo, and really, work together. And at any point, I'm sure if anybody has questions of where do I start, where's step one, where's square one, all three of us, four of us, including Taylor, are happy to help you along that process. And we'll be able to give you the information and resources you need to start that process and get it off on the right foot.
Mic drop, laying the truth, nothing but the truth. Like Michael Newton said, like all three of these guys said, reach out to them, man. Jesus Christ, please reach out to them if you need support. You have questions. You just need to know, what should I do in my situation? You have a challenge. All three of these guys, including myself, would be happy to support you and give you that expertise and that knowledge to make your life 10 times easier and put you on a path to success. So please, guys, if you guys need support, again, Mike Matranga is based in Texas. Captain Rick Francis is based in Florida, and Mr. Michael Newton is based in Colorado. Three leaders in the K-12 space. Guys, again, thank you all for the time this evening. Those have questions, comments, and concerns, you can email me at info@securityvip.net. Once again, that's info@securityvip.net. You can watch this episode on YouTube. Listen to us on Spotify when you're on the road, and then check us out on LinkedIn for the latest announcements and features about this podcast series. You guys stay safe out there. Check us out on the next one.
Gotta recognize you are